Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping right into something pretty major happening in global trade. These new significant tariff hikes between the United States and China.
Yeah, they're substantial, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the U.S. has slapped, 104% tariff on certain Chinese goods?
That's right, 104%. And China didn't wait long to respond.
No, they came back with an 84% tariff on some American products.
Exactly. And the sources we looked at, they really frame this as much more than just, a typical trade spat.
Right. It's positioned as this big economic, even strategic contest, a real power play.
With consequences that are going to ripple out way beyond just the U.S. and China.
So our goal here today is to really unpack this. Why now? What are the economic hits for everyone involved?
And the wider geopolitical stuff, too. Like, what does this mean for the global order?
Yeah.
For smaller countries?
Yeah, exactly. Because these aren't small changes. I mean, 104%, 84%.
No, these are huge jumps. They could genuinely reshape how goods move around the world.
And potentially affect the prices we all pay for, everyday stuff.
Definitely a possibility.
So we need to dig into the specific reasons, the concerns driving these actions, and what it signals, about where international relations might be heading.
Okay,
so let's kick things off. Why the tariffs? What's the immediate trigger behind this latest clash?
Well, looking at it from the U.S. perspective, a big part of it seems to be this growing anxiety about what they call Chinese overproduction.
Overproduction in specific areas.
Yeah, particularly in key industries. Think electric vehicles, solar panels, semiconductors too. The argument from the U.S. side is that China's producing way more than its domestic market needs, and these often cheaper exports are basically flooding global markets.
So the U.S. sees this as China kind of exporting its own economic issues?
Sort of, yeah. And they claim this influx poses a direct threat to American manufacturers in those same critical sectors. It makes it hard for them to compete.
Okay, so it's about protecting domestic industry from what they see as unfairly priced competition.
That's the core argument being put forward, yes.
Now, how does China see it? What's their take on why the U.S. is doing this?
Well, China views it quite differently. From Beijing's perspective, this looks like economic aggression, plain and simple.
Aggression? How so?
They see these tariffs as a deliberate attempt by the U.S. to kind of hinder China's technological rise and its overall economic development, a way to keep them down, essentially.
So they don't see it as a fair trade measure at all?
Not at all. Their response, that 84% tariff, is framed very much as a necessary countermeasure, a forceful pushback against what they see as, protectionism from Washington.
Right, okay. So a classic tit for tat, but the percentages involved are just,
wow,
very high stakes, definitely.
Let's shift then to the economic fallout. This is bound to hurt, right? But who hurts more? What are the likely consequences for the U.S. economy first?
For the U.S., it's a bit of a mixed bag, potentially. In the short term, some local industries might get a bit of breathing room, less competition from those specific Chinese imports.
Okay, some protection there. But the downside is pretty significant. It's very likely that American consumers will end up paying more for goods hit by these tariffs.
Like what sort of goods are we talking about?
Could be electronics, various household items, maybe even some types of clothing. Anything still heavily reliant on Chinese manufacturing or components. And it's not just consumers. American businesses that import parts or materials from China, their production costs are likely going up too.
Which could feed back into consumer prices again or squeeze businesses.
Exactly. And all of this raises the risk of pushing inflation back up, which is obviously a big concern.
Okay, so potential pain for consumers and businesses, maybe some relief for specific manufacturers. What about China? How does their economy handle this? Are they in a good position?
Well, the sources suggest China's economy is already dealing with some pretty significant headwinds.
Like what?
Slowing growth overall, the ongoing property market crisis, high youth unemployment. Those are already big challenges.
Right. So this comes at a tricky time for them.
Very tricky. So adding a major hit to their export market, especially with a huge partner like the U.S., could be really damaging.
Damaging how? Like job losses?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Millions of jobs in China could be affected, particularly in those export-heavy sectors, electronics, textiles, industries that have historically sold a lot to the U.S.
So it sounds like both sides are going to feel some economic pain from this.
Oh, absolutely. There are really no winners in a trade war like this, economically speaking.
Just different types of pain, perhaps? Different vulnerabilities?
That's a good way to put it. The impacts will be felt, but maybe differently, and the severity could vary.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit. The sources we looked at really stress that this isn't just about tariffs and trade numbers. It's tied into a bigger struggle, right? About global influence, the future economic order.
Yes, that's a crucial point. This is deeply geopolitical. The U.S. actions, these tariffs, can be seen as a way to defend its long-standing dominant position in the global economy.
Especially in tech and innovation.
Exactly. It looks like an attempt to push back against China's rapid rise in those very areas.
And China's response, the retaliation, it's not just about the tariffs themselves either, is it? It signals something bigger.
It really does.
Yeah.
China's reaction, plus their increasing talk about self-reliance, trying to boost their own domestic market, and actively building stronger trade links with countries in the global south.
Yeah.
It all suggests they're refusing to be sort of sidelined or contained by the U.S.
So they're pushing back against the existing order. Or trying to reshape it.
It points towards a real determination not to be marginalized, yeah. And it highlights what the sources call a systemic rivalry.
Systemic rivalry, meaning?
Basically a clash between different fundamental models. You've got the U.S. model, generally seen as more market-driven capitalism,
right,
versus China's model, which is often described as state capitalism, where the government plays a much more direct role in the economy.
So state capitalism involves more central planning and state-owned enterprises playing a big role.
Yes. Exactly. More centralized economic strategy versus, what's traditionally seen as more open markets. It's a clash of economic philosophies, really, playing out on a global scale.
Wow. So it's capitalism versus state capitalism almost. Okay, so with this big clash happening, what about other major global players? How are they reacting? Europe, for instance.
Europe's watching this very closely and with quite a bit of concern. Especially countries like Germany, which rely heavily on exports.
Because disruptions are bad for business?
Yeah, exactly. Any major disruption to global trade caused by U.S.-China tension is worrying for them. It hits their economic model hard.
Okay. Any other key players? What about India?
India is interesting. The sources suggest India is trying to position itself strategically here.
How so?
As a potential alternative manufacturing hub, trying to attract investment that might be looking to move away from China, partly because of these tensions.
So potentially benefiting from the friction.
That seems to be the strategy, yes. Capitalizing on the uncertainty.
And Russia. How do they fit into this picture?
Well, one perspective highlighted is that Russia might actually welcome a more divided West.
Why is that?
If the U.S. and Europe are more distracted by trade conflicts or focusing inward, it potentially gives Russia more geopolitical breathing room. Anything that weakens Western unity could be seen as advantageous from Moscow's viewpoint.
Okay, that makes sense. And smaller nations, are they just bystanders?
Not exactly bystanders, more like adapting.
Yeah.
Countries like Brazil, Vietnam, Saudi Arabia, they're reportedly already adjusting their trade strategies and foreign policies.
Trying to figure out how to navigate this shifting landscape.
Yeah, they see the ground shifting and are trying to figure out where they fit in the new reality, how to best protect their own interests going forward.
It really sounds like the ripple effects are going far and wide. It's not just a U.S.-China thing anymore.
Not at all. The whole global system is feeling the tremors.
Which brings us to a really important, maybe sobering question. Who actually pays the price for all this? The sources seem particularly concerned about one group.
Yes, there's a strong emphasis on the potential negative impact on poorer countries, particularly in the global south, Africa, South Asia, Latin America.
How are they affected? Why are they potentially the collateral damage, as one source put it?
Well, they're vulnerable in several ways. First, disruptions to global supply chains often hit them hard, as their economies can be heavily reliant on specific links in those chains.
Okay.
Second, they're often very exposed to volatility in commodity prices. If global trade slows down or becomes unpredictable, those price swings can be devastating for their budgets and people. And third, there's a real risk that major powers like the U.S. and China might become more internally focused, potentially leading to cuts in foreign aid or investment that these countries rely on.
So they get squeezed from multiple directions.
Precisely. And politically, they're often caught in a really difficult spot.
How so?
They face pressure to align economically with either the U.S. or China, but choosing sides can risk alienating the other power. It can feel like a no-win situation.
Like that example you mentioned, an African nation relying on exports to China.
Right. If Chinese demand drops because of U.S. tariffs, that nation suffers, even though they weren't directly involved in the initial dispute. It highlights a real vulnerability in the system for less powerful nations.
It really does paint a stark picture. So wrapping things up, where does this leave us? Is this the start of a new Cold War, like some people are saying, or something else entirely?
It's hard to say definitively, but these tariffs definitely feel like a symptom of a larger trend. What we're seeing is a decline in global cooperation, not just in trade, but across politics, climate action.
A move away from multilateralism.
Yeah, it feels like a shift towards a more fragmented world. More of an every nation for itself kind of attitude seems to be taking hold.
Which sounds worrying.
It is. The sources describe this whole situation as a kind of wake-up call. It signals a really fundamental reshaping of globalization, a potential realignment of international alliances.
So the big question isn't just who wins this particular tariff fight.
No. The much bigger question is who will ultimately shape the new rules of the global order? Who gets to define what the future looks like? That's really what's at stake here.
So it's clear this deep dive into the U.S.-China tariffs shows it's incredibly complex, way more than just a trade issue. It's economics, it's geopolitics.
Absolutely. It's a major moment with potentially very long-lasting effects on global commerce, how countries relate to each other, and the economic health of nations everywhere, big and small.
And as the sources suggest, while the U.S. and China feel the immediate impact, those ripple effects, especially in the global south, could be profound and reshape the world order we've known.
Which leads to a final thought, maybe for everyone listening.
Yeah.
Given how connected everything is globally, how might these big trade shifts eventually touch your own daily life? Maybe in ways you haven't thought about.
That's a good question.
And looking ahead, what role can or maybe should international cooperation play in trying to manage these huge, complex global challenges? Can we find a way back to working together more effectively?